imagine a world, and this is something that would have to be sandboxed and on the test server and get a lot of feedback. Imagine a world in which nobody or a very slim number of defenders had the 1.5 and instead you prioritized it to the attack. I think that would be very, very intriguing. I don't think everybody needs it, and I certainly don't think that defenders need the 1.5.
All right. Welcome to episode 7 of the Siege Show presented by Jake and Guzz. We've got a big week this week, of course, a bit to go over. We've had some action take place in the R6 esports world, another week, so that means another set of power rankings to come your way, which we've had some interesting change-ups. And on top of that, our sort of, I guess, main general segment for today, the topic of point is going to be sort of surrounding ranked. Ranked versus competitive, I guess, if you will. The reason for that probably comes from CS2.
Yep.
The new Premier system that has just come out, obviously, in the beta, but still, it's fascinating to me because obviously the goal of it is to replace Faceit, but it also just brings the game naturally closer to what it is competitively.
Yeah, and that's been a pressure point probably for me and maybe part of the community for the longest time is this big separation between competitive Siege and ranked Siege. It is not the same. There's 3 main things that we've listed here that are different. The map veto system is different, the map pool size is different, and the length of matches is different. So in terms of the veto in competitive, and it goes hand in hand with the map pool, you have the 9 maps, you alternate bans and ultimately end up on a map, whereas in Siege, you have the single ban each, and then it randomizes the remaining 3, which personally I really don't like at all. But I don't know really what the solution would be. Maybe we can chat a little bit about that. And then, of course, game length. 1st to 7, competitive, ranked 1st to 4. I would love for there to be a world in which those could be aligned in terms of game duration, but I just don't think a lot of people would have that commitment. Even myself, I think it would be tough. And if you get thrown into like a lobby at 3 a.m. where the matchmaking is not going to be great and you have to sit through like a 0-7 stomping, I think that's going to turn a lot of people away. So I think it's very difficult to one-to-one compare Siege and CS in that department. But I think it goes without saying that the fact that CS is able to have the same in their ranked and competitive scene does offer a lot of benefits, and it seems like at least in that community it works really well.
I feel like you don't have to copy it one for one. I think there's a world in which you can take elements from it. I think, for example, like the map veto system, personally, the fact that it's like, okay, we both ban 1 each, which a lot of the times can end up being you both end up banning the same map.
Yeah.
In which case, then the randomization has an even larger effect. So I don't like that. I feel like at that point, you haven't obviously actually started the game. So let's say you're in a group with your friends and one guy's got to go to the toilet. It's fine. He can go. You can do the ban system without him. So I'd like to see them revisit the map veto for ranked in Siege. I think that's something that they could look into. Again, doesn't have to necessarily copy the system of CS, and it certainly doesn't have to be an exact replica of what we get from competitive.
Well, I mean, it can't be a replica of competitive. You think about the amount of time it would take to ban one. You'd spend 5 minutes just banning a map, which is completely ridiculous. And that's why this system at the moment is at least time efficient. You can get the bans done in 15 seconds. The problem arises, though, is that you have such a huge map pool with so many maps that, frankly, just aren't up to scratch for ranked, that you might get like 5 maps. There might be one that you want to play, which means that even if you ban out 2 of the shit maps that are left or whatever, it's still a 1 in 3 chance you're actually both teams are probably going to play a map that they actually want to play at the end of the day. So I think we need to try and find a place to reduce the randomization. I think, though, that people may disagree with us and they want to see variety in map picks. I often see that, right? Like, it took the longest time for you to not be able to ban a new map in ranked, for instance. And I know that was a talking point for a long time, is we shouldn't be allowed to ban new maps. I think, though, the discussion is a little bit more nuanced when you have established maps like, I don't know, Outback, for instance, that's been out for a while and generally frowned upon in the ranked community. Should we just be bloating the map pool for the sake of bloating the map pool?
Yeah.
I don't think so, but obviously we encourage people to give their thoughts, and again, we might be out of touch with the common man. I don't know.
Well, I think that's where, again, you could easily bring the ranked map pool to match the competitive map pool.
Well, it's 9 now. So.
It's already, quite large. 9 maps is still quite a lot. So you're getting good variety there.
I still think 9 maps is too much, but I will say if we have a system where every season or at least every stage, 2 in, 2 out at a consistent rate, and the new map generally, if it's good enough, gets put in, I think that's going to keep people happy. We're not going to be bloating the pool for the sake of it, but we're also going to be adding enough variety to freshen it up over time. We still have maps outside of the comp pool that I still think could also be in ranked, like Villa, for instance, right? So, look, I think it needs to be looked at. I think there's, at the end of the day, and my main point, there are too many maps in ranked for Siege, and the veto system lends itself into having too much randomness, which then leads to player frustration. That's at least my view, and I don't know. Hopefully going forward it gets refined. I thought it might have with Rank 2.0, but seemingly wasn't in the discussion, or maybe it's something that's coming down the line.
What about the game length, though, for ranked and sort of where you sit? Because obviously you very quickly touched on the whole, first to 4, obviously, versus first to 7 for competitive. I don't think anyone's asking for first to 7, because obviously that would just be far too long to commit to. But in terms of the actual game length overall, even for a first to 4, Siege does kind of feel like a relatively long game to commit to, considering you don't actually get through that many rounds.
Yeah, which, I mean, linking that back to Counter-Strike, they've actually reduced the amount of rounds now to the MR12 system. So they've actually cut back quite a few rounds in order to address that. And that probably goes back to competitive, because it means now they can sort of do best of 3s for group stages and whatnot. Whereas in Siege, good luck doing best of 3s in group stage. You'll be there all year. So yeah, that's certainly an interesting discussion point. I think for me, I look at game length as it's okay where it is. I am still not a fan, though, of how overtime operates for me, because you should never be in a world where, let's say, the map veto and the operator veto have played out in an incredibly defender-sided or even attacker-sided manner. You shouldn't then just get squandered in overtime due to RNG. There either needs to be an MMR reduction, you earn less or you lose less if a game goes to OT, or draw the matches. I don't think people are going to like drawn matches. Even I would probably find that a little bit unsatisfying, so I can completely understand that point of view. But there needs to be some kind of forgiveness. If you have pushed a team to their absolute limit and you're like attacking on theme park with no fucking like Thatcher and a hard breach missing or something, and you then attack OT and you get screwed over because of that, I don't find that to be a particularly fair rank system.
There is one system, but I don't know how you would implement it into the base game. But in Face It, if it goes to overtime, both teams actually get asked whether or not they want to.
I think they did that in Valorant,
in Valorant, actually they do. So yeah, in Valorant, you can literally decide, no, I can't do overtime. So
that could work.
Yeah. So the other thing as well that I wanted to sort of quickly touch on was the fact that you mentioned maybe a competitive. Should it come down to maybe MR5 instead of 7? Should it be first to 5 rather than first to 7? You cut the hards down to 4 and 4 to reduce the length. And then from there, what you can do then, instead of ranked being first to 4, you have it be first to 5.
So you would have competitive be first
and
to
it would
5.
be, and then that way, the ranked and the competitive would be identical in terms of that system.
I mean, funnily enough, way back in the day, like in the very early days, it actually kind of was like that for Siege, and then they extended the length because in a best of 1 format, it sucked. The matches were way too short. I think,
is it though?
You could maybe get away with shorter matches, but you would have to eliminate best of 1s.
Are the matches too short though? Because like quite honestly, we're playing first to 7 right now, competitive Siege, and they're going for like a good 45 minutes to an hour.
But I mean, match length is one thing, but retaining the integrity, I think, is perfect in a first to 7, right? Because you have the double rotation. So if you're attacking and you lose the first 3 rounds, you then have that opportunity to learn from those attacks and then retry for the further sites.
That is true.
So I think that is a very strong argument for why the round system is the way it is now. Could you potentially introduce shorter games but best of 3s exclusively? Maybe. I still think it would take away, and especially teams that are good at counter-strating. So I really don't want to see competitive match lengths shortened. Equally, I don't want to see ranked matches extended.
Exactly.
So it's a very difficult grey area.
Yeah, it's unfortunately a very difficult sort of ask there. And I think that, unfortunately, somewhere along the line, whether it's ranked or whether it's competitive, something needs to bite the bullet. I personally think it needs to be more so competitive, because I think the length right now for Siege is, yes, integrity-wise and gameplay-wise, and for the players, perfect. As you said, you get the double rotation. But in terms of a broadcast and viewing experience, the game, personally to me, can be quite dull for a lot of periods when you've got prep phase and then the beginning of the action phase. There's not much happening. If you go and watch a game of CS, and the fact that they're obviously already going from MR15 to MR12, when they get into the game, it's like a minute 40 on the clock. Like, yeah. So Siege is like an extra minute on top of prep phase as well.
2 minutes.
on top of basically then having to pick your operators, right? So there's so much extra bloated time that it's not so much about the fact that, okay, you're doing MR7, maybe it should be you keep MR7, but you try and actually strip everything back elsewhere. Less prep time, maybe less action phase time. You can look into like that. And because I'm going to be completely honest, a lot of the times defenders are not doing a whole lot with the time that they've got anyway, right? It doesn't take that long to do the setups that you are planning to do. That's just the truth of it. So I think that there are ways that you could really navigate to reducing the bloat surrounding comp that is not as much there when you're playing ranked anyway.
Okay.
Cool.
I think we end it there.
Yeah, I think that we can probably end it there. To be fair, we could probably go on about that for a long time. And I don't think you'll ever probably get everyone on the same page. And that's going to make life very difficult for Ubisoft in that regard, because you're just never going to make everyone happy. Truthfully, to close it though, I do think the map pool needs reducing in ranked. And I think it should follow more what obviously competitive is doing. And that then in itself is already sort of leaning towards a direction where you've got that pathway between ranked and competitive siege. On to our next segment. A segment within a segment, actually, though, we're, I think, going to try and make this a little bit more regular, is the sort of debate/hot topic segment. Now, I like this one already because this is where we can start to be divisive between even ourselves, also with the community. For today's segment, we've got two questions, which we'll answer individually, but should every gun have a 1.5x scope, and should every operator be 2 speed? I'll go back to the first one there. So, Guzz, should every gun have a 1.5x scope? Now, this is not yes or no or WRL. This is just, I want your thoughts on it.
Yeah, look, I think that this topic alone is probably one of the most topical discussion points at the moment, especially from like a ranked and competitive perspective. I think even casuals at this point are really chipping in. I am constantly seeing, Reddit threads, tweets, etc. about the 1.5 scope. And there's been a lot of different proposals on how to remedy this issue. And I think at this point, everyone is sort of on the same page that the 1.5 is a problem in the game. Now, it was introduced alongside a couple of other news sites a few years ago now, with Ubisoft trying to encourage a bit more variance and a bit more variety, which I think from a game design perspective, fundamentally was a good idea, because everyone was getting a bit stagnant with, site choices, and it does, unfortunately, add, an ability to balance guns and operators now, which has probably become a bit of a topical point, right? Is instead of operators being balanced or changed or whatever, they're now removing the 1.5 times scope. So I think Ubisoft have kind of admitted this point with their balancing changes that it is quite powerful. But the question now is, how do you address it? So one option, every gun, every operator gets the 1.5. Another option is you completely remove the sight. Nobody gets it. Another option is only the attack gets it, because the game inherently is still very defender-sided. Which one of those would work? I don't know. Other options include you rework the sight, make the reticule larger to be more cumbersome. You make the housing of the sight reduce more of your vision around it, because the 1.5 at its core is just perfect in every regard. It has the best magnification for medium range, long range, and you don't get caught off guard short range like you might with an ACOG. The reticule is incredibly small, so you get great vision. The housing around it is also very small, so you're not blocked in terms of like you might be with an ACOG like you were back in the day. So it's a lot to unpack. How would I fix it? It's tough. I don't like the idea of giving everyone the 1.5, because I think it inherently changes the engagement range too much in Siege, and the maps were not built around the 1.5 being in the game. If I was going to be radical, though, I would probably remove it completely from defense, and maybe not give it to every attacker, but maybe give it to like supportive attackers that can play the backline on attack, so that they have more of an inherent buff. Because like I said, and even in comp, the game's still quite defender-sided. I
think there's, my sort of view on it, there's a couple of ways you can approach this, and I think obviously a lot of the ways you mentioned probably nail on the head. You could look to honestly also, when you equip the 1.5x, your recoil gets adjusted, so that's a little bit harder to control the spray when you're actually using that scope. The only issue with that is it's not that it makes it worse, it's probably just not as fun to use. But that technically would add a skill element to it, wouldn't it? The other being, you kind of look at like, who are the top operators in terms of their gadgets, their utility, what they bring to the table. Have they got a 1.5x? If they do, take it away. and try and then give it to the operators that maybe don't bring as much to the table, right? Like your rooks and your docks that are just kind of like, they don't do too much. They don't have too much of an impact overall, but they have the 1.5x and they can obviously, use it and not have to worry as much about their utility. So you could look at it in that way. I think should your like Azamis have it? No, they already bring enough to the table, right? So any kind of operator that already brings a lot to the table absolutely should not have it.
But I mean, the easiest argument against that, though, and it's one I see often and one I probably agree with, does that then just lead to lazy balancing decisions and the devs just letting operators like your rook or your dock or whoever it is just rot? Like, okay, they have a good gadget. All right, we'll take away the 1.5. They don't have a good gadget. Okay, let's just not worry about the gadget because that's going to be a lot of work, which does make sense. Let's just give them the 1.5. An instance of that is Thorn, right? The Razor Blooms are the most inconsistent pieces of trap utility. So they take away the 1.5 from Capcan. They then give it to Thorn. Is that really the route that we want to be going down?
That's true.
I don't really know. You've got Warden, for instance, who is obviously the big talking point around this because nobody plays him for the utility. 99% of the rank stars that play him don't even know he has a gadget. He has a negative win delta, yet he's one of the most picked operators on the defense purely because he has the MPX with the 1.5. And I think it just goes back to my earlier point. Imagine a world, and this is something that would have to be sandboxed and on the test server and get a lot of feedback. Imagine a world in which nobody or a very slim number of defenders had the 1.5 and instead you prioritized it to the attack. I think that would be very, very intriguing. I don't think everybody needs it, and I certainly don't think that defenders need the 1.5.
Yeah, I think to close out this little debate for this particular topic, my final stance on it would be if it's too difficult to balance, I would just remove it in its entirety.
Or rework it.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I'm probably saying that I don't know if Ubisoft are going to be able to rework it, so I'd say it's just easier to I think the easier option would be to just remove it. So 1.5x, completely removed from the game. No one has it. It's gone. Your side options now just come down to probably like holographics and red dots, and that just obviously means that you're no longer going to really have magnification outside of particular gadgets, operators like, your Carlies and your Glazzes, and that's it. Moving on to the next one, which is should every operator be 2-speed? I think this one's probably less contentious than the previous one. Maybe ever so slightly.
I don't think you know this community very well, Jake. Yeah, so this is something that I've personally sort of advocated quite a bit, talking when we're playing ranked and stuff. And for me, it comes from one particular issue. And it doesn't even need to see every operator be made a 2-speed to fix it, at least not this part of my argument. And that is, why are 1-speed operators louder than 3-speed operators? Now, I get it. The law, they're heavier, they're wearing more. I fucking get it. They're louder.
They got armor.
But from a gameplay design perspective, we are currently in like the most lurky attack meta ever, where the entire goal of the Yana and the Ashe is to find a way into the map and just slow walk and crouch walk around for 2 minutes. And it just adds this complete element of randomization and just bullshit cheese to the defense, where you'd never hear a 3-speed sneaking up on you. You then add on top of that, the 3-speed then has the best maneuverability and attackability when they're actually in prime position because they have that additional speed boost. So I'm not a huge fan of how 3-speeds are louder. I feel like this did get patched or addressed recently to maybe make them a little bit louder, a bit more consistent. But yeah, I'd be very intrigued to see it tested where 3-speeds are louder than 1-speeds. And my second point to that is the inconsistency of the speed of operators does again add this weird element of randomization to Siege. Would it take away some of the character of these operators if you made everyone 2-speed and standardize them? Sure, completely agree with that. But could it be better from a gameplay standpoint to have everyone the same speed? Potentially. I'd like to see it tried.
So for you, the argument then is not actually as much to do with the movement speed as it is sort of the benefits and negatives that come from either 3-speed or 1-speed. That's basically what you're getting at. And so you kind of wanted to say, okay, it's almost like RPG elements in a way, if you think about it, right? It's kind of like, oh, well, you're slow, so therefore you make more sound, or you're faster, therefore you're a bit quieter. I think you could probably say, do you need to remove 3-2-1 speed and make everyone a 2-speed versus should we look into the sound that, say, a 1-speed makes or a 3-speed makes? Because I don't necessarily mind the element that certain operators are slower or faster.
Yep.
And what is dependent off that is they also then have less or more armor as well, and maybe their gadget and the way that they play off of that. You know, you think of like Ram has obviously just come in, and Ram's a 1 speed, 3 armor with a gadget that also actually masks noise a bit, so that's kind of interesting. And so yeah, they're a little bit slower, but when Ram gets into a position, throws down the Boogie Auto Breacher, she's kind of set there. And I remember when we were talking about her on the preview, if you see a Boogie Auto Breacher, you know Ram's close by. So you've got the negatives and positives to that. If Ram's 2 speed, then you kind of lose that element, right? Because like now suddenly Ram's just like everyone else, and you can't necessarily play and have that knowledge. So I think personally for me, I like the 3-2-1 system, but I also agree with you that you shouldn't be able to differentiate who's who based on like, oh, they're a bit their footsteps are louder or they're heavier. So I think we're in agreement here.
Yeah, I mean, again, it doesn't necessarily need to be that 1 speeds are louder than 3 speeds or the other way, whatever. I think I'm confusing myself. It doesn't have to be a system where a 3 speed is louder than a 1 speed. It could be standardized. I think everyone probably in general needs a bit of a boost in terms of volume because it's a little bit crazy how much you can just slow walk around the map these days. So yeah, I think I agree. Standardizing speed would not be probably my favorite outcome. It is very radical, and I understand there would be a lot of backlash and people probably wouldn't like it, and even I may not like it after testing it. I think every operator has their own characteristics, and their speed can actually, you know, work hand in hand with their gadget, as you mentioned. I
think the last thing as well to close out the debate and hot topics for this particular week is that if you go down the route of everyone has 1.5x, everyone's 2 speed, you start to now create an environment where every operator is largely the same outside of just their gadget. And I find that a little bit boring. The beauty of Siege, and while it maybe doesn't flow as nicely into competitive or ranked, for example, is the fact that it's got a little bit of those little RPG elements where everyone has got some little differences and niches and nuances. And I think that is a good thing, and I don't think you want to strip that away, but I do think you can say, let's keep it, but let's balance it. And that's really all it should come down to. Just putting more attention and more eyes from Ubisoft's side into these kind of ideas, into these issues, and maybe you come up with solutions, as you said, like the sound rather than the speed, or instead of 1.5x being on everyone, you just kind of actually take the time to balance it. So fun little segment. We'll obviously try and keep that as a regular, and I'm sure they'll get more contentious as the weeks go on.
Tame.
That was pretty light. Now on to the esports segment for this week. Now we are filming this prior to a couple of regions concluding the week. Oceania 1, I think EUL another, but we do still have some changes actually,
updates,
and obviously some updates from Japan, South Korea, NAL, technically the back end of last week's EUL too. So we'll get straight into that one. Not sure which one you want to start with.
EU.
I was going to say
it's already up on the screen.
We've got our EUL up on the screen. So not too many massive changes. BDS go up 1. Now again, reiterating from last week, the way we sort of grade this, it is also a continuation / follow on from last week. We'll stay in the S tier, even though they probably didn't do as much crazy stuff this week as they did in the opening week. And we see some others obviously moving around. Koi out of the F tier, Heroic down there. Their slump kind of really continues for the stage.
Yeah, Koi unfortunately still struggling a little bit, but some small improvements. Yeah, Heroic, bad week. I think it was like 2 losses. VP maybe could have been bumped up a little bit, but still I think they're probably performing at least underneath my expectations. So yeah, EU shaping up to be very interesting. You think about the Wolves in stage 1, they were shocking throughout this group stage, and now at the moment they've been pretty difficult to take down. So very exciting storyline for them. But a pretty different story in the world of EUL compared to NA, which is shaping up to probably be the craziest league outside of OS at the moment.
Yeah, now we're not probably going to be spending as long with each particular region as we did last week, and obviously with the regional breakdowns. This is more just a quick little update. NAL on your screen right now, as you can see, absolutely all over the place. In the middle of the pack that we've got in terms of no one in the F tier, no one in the S tier, M80 maybe just slightly pulling away in the A tier. Everyone else, I mean, we've seen Beast Coast, Mirage, and Luminosity all in the C tier. At some point, over the last week or two, at least get a decent little result and keep them sort of around in terms of the points. And everyone in the B tier, from Wildcard to SSG, who obviously we didn't have them ranked for week 1 as they had not played as per the system. All of those teams in the B tier, they look neck and neck. I feel like they can all take points off each other. They can all beat each other. And that's going to make really it hard to understand who's going to come out of NAL and go to the major.
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately the end goal, the end question, right? Who's actually going to go to the major? Unfortunate for Wildcard, they get knocked out of the S tier, but still, they're doing well. I think you could very much make an argument they probably still deserve A tier, considering the background of this team and how well they have been able to perform. I do quickly want to touch on OXG as well. Bit of interaction in the comments. Solo commented, he's got a bit of beef around the 18-minute mark. I'm not an OXG fan at all, but that roster is great on and off paper. Foxay has a lot of knowledge, and we've seen him clutch many big rounds. Newers is mechanically gifted to the likes of Bolo, and yeah, I would largely agree. I'm actually a decent fan of OXG, and I think they've done quite a bit. That's why they deserve it in that B tier, and certainly a team to watch out for the major. So yeah, NAL shaping up to be very competitive. I think we'll see that split apart probably as we enter the latter stages of stage 2. But yeah, the group stage has been pretty wild.
Yeah, I'm trying to find Brazil, but I don't know what you've done with it. I think you've got it hidden, so I might get you on to help me out there here live.
I may not have picked it.
Yeah, I don't think you may have put that one in there. So over to Brazil we go, and maybe very, very much stark contrast to NAL, straight from NAL to Brazil here. We've got a couple of teams that are doing very, very well at the top. W7M and E1 just continue to really dominate their respective groups. NIP, Black Dragons, doing quite well. They've been really strong over the first few weeks now. And I feel like everyone in that C tier, which just strangely enough has FaZe and Liquid, they're either just struggling or maybe meeting expectations if they're one of the lower teams. Obviously you get like some minors that are in there as well, and then Lost One continue to stay in the F tier. They are like 0-3. They're looking shocking this stage, considering they were a team that effectively just missed out on the major and back in Copenhagen by like one slot, by one game. So disappointing to see sort of the way that they've started the stage, but good to see the likes of E1 up there. Black Dragons are hanging around doing well. NIP feel like they're maybe taking that next step to really be a contender in this region, a region that's already very strong. This is a region that's typically top heavy, but you're seeing some of the top contenders now sort of fall back into the middle of the pack, FaZe and Liquid, and some others rising to the top.
Yeah, we'll jump over to Japan then. I don't really have too much more to add. And this also, kind of like NAL to an extent, is decently compact. No team we've put shooting out through that S tier. Now, Japan has already played through most of the knockout stage outside of the grand final, which hasn't been played for stage 2, stage 1 of the major. But Cyclops, Scars, they both qualified. Unfortunate for Northeption, we had them in the S tier heading into the knockout stage. They didn't quite perform to expectation. It did go to a third map, so I wouldn't rule Northeption from being able to snag that third spot at the major through the next portion of the LCQ. But I think for me, the big storyline is probably the return to form for Cyclops, because stage 1 was a bit of a disaster. And then for Scars as well, they've continued their really nice run of form. They've been improving a lot over the last 12 to 24 months.
I agree.
They get rewarded. And that grand final, to see who gets slotted into stage 2 of the major, Cyclops and Scars, I genuinely think will actually be quite a good game.
Certainly. I probably don't know who to actually give the edge to in that, although I will say, to conclude for Japan, I would be very surprised if Northeption in the LCQ don't qualify. That would be a shock. I really would be disappointed too, because I think they're a really fun team, as we evidently saw in the semi-final. Went to all 3 maps, the last map being a 7-5 loss for them against Scars, who are obviously a very, very good team in Japan. Over to their sister region, Korea, and they too have got some qualifications. Sandbox, D+, they go through very, very different aspect in terms of how they got through. Both 2-0s in their semi-finals, both rather comfortable. I think we anticipated that, especially for Sandbox. I maybe did expect a little bit more from Talon in that game against D+, but I will say, in fairness, when we kind of think back to the group stage, D+ started a little slow, and they just have picked up ever since, and they're really starting to hit their stride. So I wouldn't even say Sandbox are a guarantee for that phase 2 by winning the grand final. I think this is going to be a really strong grand final. These two, typically giants of the Korean region, will go head to head there. Talon, we've got them in the A tier, just because I think that Weeble weren't particularly amazing in their quarterfinal, and also BSG probably aren't ahead of Talon right now. But I'd say they're all pretty similar, and it's going to be very interesting to see who gets that third slot from Korea in the LCQ. I think at the moment, obviously, as we can see on the power rankings, Talon probably lead the way for that, but I would not count out Weevil or BSG, and I still wouldn't count out La Vega.
You are still on that La Vega hype train. We'll jump over to MENA then. Now, we didn't do power rankings from last week. We didn't really feel it was necessary. But heading into this particular day, wow, it has really seen a shake-up. GK managed to take down Falcons. That all but secures them for the major pretty much at this point we're expecting. So unfortunate to see the Falcons fall from grace the way they have. They've just been put into C tier. I mean, if we wanted to be super harsh, they could probably be put in the F tier, given that the expectation for them would have been to make the major relatively cleanly too. But obviously, big props to GK for closing that gap, actually jumping ahead of Falcons. Again, much like OS, a very unforgiving format, so unfortunate for the Falcons. And they're not completely out of it from here, but I mean, for all intents and purposes, they need a couple of teams to monumentally screw up from this point onwards, which, again, sucks for Falcons as a team, as an organization. I guess for MENA, though, as a region, again, continuing to prove that they're quite competitive.
I love the MENA region. I hope in future we can get more English broadcasts from this region. Obviously, GK now on top, so that gives good competition for Falcons. And then, honestly, even Twisted Minds pushed Falcons all the way to deep OT as well. Probably could have even stolen that game, got a win there too. So suddenly you've got some strong teams. Triple Esports too, we've got them in the A tier. So it's a really strong region that I think is just continuing to thrive and grow, and has well and truly like overtaken South Asia. I think you go back maybe two and a half years ago, South Asia had some okay teams that were doing quite well, probably in comparison to MENA. That's not the case anymore. No. And speaking of South Asia, we'll try and get them up here on. There we go. Last one I clicked. Obviously in combination with Southeast Asia, it's still Bleed and Fury. It will remain Bleed and Fury the whole way through.
Probably.
And got to remember, there's only 2 slots from Asia. So all of South Asia, all of Southeast Asia, you only get the 2 slots. And right now, no one looks even close to Bleed and Fury. The closest being No Cap. They've started to rise back up. Now, you think back to play day 1 for Southeast Asia. No Cap had to play Bleed and Fury straight up the bat. And obviously, they've taken a little bit of time to sort of just get warmed up and talk about a culmination by beating Direwolves pretty comfortably. It's got them now in a position where third should go their way, which gets them into the LCQ in a good position, a good seeding. I could envision a world where Fury and No Cap play for a spot at the major, and Onigiri can do some crazy things.
Yeah, Onigiri just falling short of a 2.0 rating. I had a look. I think it was 1.96.
19 in 10 rounds.
And he had like 3 clutches or something crazy. He popped off. He was really alive in that game. So No Cap have found form at the right time. Will they be good enough, though, to snatch a spot from Bleed, from Fury? I mean, on their day, maybe, but it's a long shot. They're definitely pinned in as a dark horse, and I'd say the gap between A tier and B tier continues to extend. Direwolves, unfortunately, they're not hitting their stride at the moment. Could they peak at the right time when it comes to the LCQ? Perhaps. Bleed and Fury all the way from this point onwards. If they don't qual for the major, I'd be pretty surprised.
I certainly would be. And obviously in the B tier, Direwolves, and we've re-added Monkey Hunters and Shaheens. They took a little break back in week 1 because we just didn't feel that they were performing all that well, but both of them now largely in control of South Asia. So we got them up into the B tier. And look, unfortunately for them, it's just a case of the qualification path to the major is through Bleed and Fury, and they are far too strong for any of the teams in South Asia. But we throw them a bone. We put them in the B tier with Direwolves, who have dropped off ever so slightly. We'll see if they can bounce back and elevate up into the C tier. We'll say to close out the region for Asia, Jackie Wu to elevate. He had another really good game with them. He had 2 really good games in his sort of debut. So something to watch maybe in heading into the LCQ. Elevate with Jackie Wu looks strong. It's a team that's obviously got some experience on it. I wouldn't count them out completely, but as of the power rankings, still in the C tier. Moving on to, I think we'll skip straight to our Patreon Q&A session here because we're already going on for time. So this is obviously something that we want to do on a regular basis, which is basically undoable if you sub to the Patreon. I mean, I'm just going to shout it out there. Big shout out to all of our Patreon subscribers. The list keeps growing apparently, so much love to all. This one comes from Turdster, which is, what is your perfect solution for APAC major spots next year in 2024? Keep it exactly the same or remove/add some region slots. And he says to say no APAC finals. That's not a suggestion.
Jeez, he's given us the impossible question turn. Firstly, I'd take away a spot from Asia so he can't qual. Nah, just kidding. Obviously, Turdstar plays for Bleed. This is a tough one. I think straight off the bat, the biggest and easiest solution, especially on a global scale, is removing a spot from Japan and removing a spot from Korea. You give one to NA, one to EU. I think that is probably pretty fair considering how competitive those regions have proven to be overseas. There is, the other side of the discussion, which is the business side, and I'm not an expert on that. So perhaps Korea and Japan are adding enough value to justify that spot. That could obviously be the case. But in terms of remedying some of the woes globally, remove a spot from Japan, remove a spot from Korea. I think that would be pretty fair. If you want to get a little bit more experimental and without having a LAN, you could maybe have it so there's like some kind of combined Japan-Korea finals. That would be doable on ping and have some kind of distribution there. That could be a possibility. But I think Asia having 2 spots is fair. OS having 1 spot, also pretty fair. It's not as related to the major specifically, but I do think there needs to be a rejig of the Asia region. South Asia have proven they are way, way, way behind the 8 ball and probably don't deserve a standalone league at the moment. Maybe they could be integrated into C somehow as part of the full-time league, give them 1 slot into that or 2 slots into that and just remove South Asia completely, which could lead to the league having a different format. But yeah, I think Japan and Korea have failed to prove they both deserve 3 slots.
I agree with that. I don't know if I could say much more beyond it, because then it starts to get really tricky, as you said, in terms of even the finances and stuff. And it's not as if you can really sit back and say Asia deserve 3. I don't think they do, until the likes of Bleed and Fury, which I guess is a shout out to you, Turdster. But if you want more slots, win a major. If you want more slots, exactly, go win a fucking major, and suddenly you can maybe get more slots given to your region. That's probably the only way to really go about it. Until you start performing at a major from the APAC region, doesn't matter if you're Oceania, doesn't matter if you're Asia, doesn't matter if you're MENA. You need to start performing at the major. That's just simply how you're going to be able to do it. If Oceania has, like, say, 2 teams, well, just hypothetically, let's say you've got Bliss and you've got,
Triple R.
I was going to say Odium, but yeah, whatever. Triple R, I guess, is technically there right now. So let's say you got Triple R and you got Bliss, and they're both amazing, and they both have a history of performing well at the major. Like, we're talking getting out of phase 1, getting into phase 2, deep into the finals, even phase 3. You would almost feel compelled to say, well, why are we only allowing 1 to come? Let's just bring them both. 2 slots for Oceania. Bang. That's for me the way I sort of view it. Unfortunately, in terms of a perfect solution for APAC next year, there isn't one, because unfortunately, unless someone goes and performs really well at Atlanta and then after that SI, you're just not going to get more slots. It's just not going to happen. And the only thing that will happen is Japan and Korea will probably both lose a slot, or maybe just Korea. I do kind of see Japan being okay to have 3, but Korea definitely does not deserve 3.
Who do you give it to then? Because you're going to have NA and EU at each other's throats.
I mean, you got to give it to EU, right?
Do you though?
I think you do.
Probably.
I think if...
NA is very competitive.
If you're giving it to EU and NA, first to receive it would be EU, and NA would probably receive it second.
Okay.
I think that's the way I would do it.
I mean, again, the big asterisk on this is having no APAC LAN just makes this so difficult, because my perfect solution would be you have... Well, how many slots do they have at the moment? We have 3, 3, 2, 1. So 6, 8, 9 slots. I think you could reduce that down to like 6, give 1 to NA, 1 to EU, 1 to Brazil, and then have, 10 teams play off at an APAC finals or something for those slots. But that is very logistically difficult. So
as things stand at the moment, phase 1 of a major kind of feels like an impromptu APAC finals.
It pretty much
anyway, because it's pretty much just filled with APAC teams. But
well, do we reduce the number of teams at the major, because it's at a historical high of 24 teams? It's more than SI has been in the past. That's another discussion, probably for another day. Are there too many teams at the major in the first place?
I will say this is, unfortunately, those from APAC, again, doesn't matter if you're Japan, Korea, Asia, Oceania, you are in no place to ask for more slots. If anything, you are at threat of losing slots. If they want to reduce how many teams go to a major,
you're on the chopping block.
You're on the chopping block, mate. You're first one up. Asia, 1 slot. That's just the way it's going to be. Unfortunately, that's just the case of it. So, perfect solution would be you got to start performing at the major. It's as simple as that. And we'd love to see that, and hopefully it can happen. And obviously, it's going to be a case of you've got to be very consistent, because you've got to keep getting there. You've got to keep getting experience by going there. You look at Bleed, they missed out. Copenhagen, that could have been some experience gained. They don't have it. Now you got to go to Atlanta. Got to get there first as
I
well.
think we do need to see the formats though change to help facilitate that. So hopefully that's a longer term discussion, an extra stage, extending the formats as they are. I know Champ on Patreon also did ask about
Shout out,
that.
Champ.
We're definitely not ignoring that, but this episode has gone on for a little while longer, so we'll probably go into more depth in that in the future because it is a very good discussion point. Different regions having different formats. All the formats this year are pretty whack. So it's definitely something to talk about going forward. Probably, yeah.
We'll chat about that one next week. Shout out to Champ for that Patreon Q&A as well, and we'll look to wrap the episode up with that and a good one. We've got Oceania, of course, to be casting tonight and tomorrow. Should be a lot of fun. There's obviously EUL, etc. So the world of R6 just keeps on rolling, and we'll be returning next week for episode 8. We'll bring more hot topics and debates. More Patreon Q&As, and if you guys watching at home obviously want to get involved with that, please give us your thoughts, YouTube comments. Obviously you can subscribe to the Patreon, link down below, and you can interact with us on the Discord. We've been able to do that actually the last couple of days. A lot of people have started to join in and get on board, so much love to all, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye.